Oh, it was serious.
Wow.
I nearly died in the ambulance. It's a long story, but one rattlesnake tried to kill me. 32 kept me alive.
Another. Hello, I'm Nipper Reed.
And I'm Phil Wolf.
So, settle down, have a nice cup of tea, and enjoy the Venomous Exchange Radio podcast.
Crumpets, Nipper. I want the crumpets.
Well, as you've been such an extraordinarily good boy. Tonight, Venom Exchange Radio is so pleased and honoured to host an amazing guest, one of the most influential modern herpetologists, Professor of Herpetology at Wolverhampton University, Honorary Doctorate of Science from Wolverhampton University, past Chairman of the International Herpetological Society, Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and the Explorers Club of New York, and most recently awarded the MBE. And for those of you not familiar with the UK award system, MBE stands for Member of the Meritorious Order of the British Empire.
However, most of the people listening to this may know Mark from his massive influence in the groundbreaking TV show O'Shea's Big Adventure, as well as many of his books that he's written for us, such as Venomous Snakes of the World. So welcome to the show, Professor Mark O'Shea. Awesome to have you here, man. Super
Thank you very much.
So, Nipper, why don't you kick this off for us?
Well, I mean, I've had the honour of talking to Mark a number of times, and Mark's experiences in herpetoculture, particularly field herping, would fill an absolute series for us. So we thought we'd try and be a little bit, logistical this evening. And we're going to try target. That's a really good word. That's why you're a professor and I kick balls in for a living. So we're going to be targeted. So we're going to try and keep it to venomous and try and take you continent by continent. So anything you want to talk about, but we're going to try and keep within those parameters, because I know if we just listen to you, you can be talking about stuff and we will be fascinated, and we'll be here in 3 weeks' time and I'll have wet myself.
We can't do that. I've got a conference to run in between.
Okay, let's get that in right now. Do you want to quickly talk about the conference?
Yeah, I will briefly. Yes. We were invited at the University of Wolverhampton, where I'm based. We were invited to host the 22nd European Congress of Herpetology, which is run by the Societas Europaea Herpetologica, which is like the Pan-European Herpetological Society. And we were actually invited to do this while we were in Belgrade, Serbia, at the 21st last September, because they were trying to get back into kilter. They're normally on the 23rd. Yeah, they're normally on the odd years, so not to clash with the World Congress. And because of COVID, it had all thrown it all out. So there was only a 1 year gap to the 22nd, and we agreed to do it. And it's been quite an experience setting up a conference. I've never done it before, nor had my colleagues. Well, one had done some conference work, and it has been, there's so many things involved in it. But we'll be running 3 parallel sessions with subjects such as museums in an age of global extinction, rewilding, diseases, all sorts of aspects of herpetology. And we've got some very good speakers coming. I think we've got delegates from 24 countries signed up at the moment. And we're running that in the Springfield campus at the University of Wolverhampton from the 4th to the 8th of September. And the Springfield campus it was an old brewery that burnt down, and they've spent, I think, £125 million refurbishing it as the School of Architecture and Built Environment. And it's a wonderful mixture of old and new. Fantastic place to hold a conference. Lovely, great atrium with old and new, where we can do the poster sessions, the icebreaker and things like that. So we're really looking forward to it, but it would be a great relief when it's over. And on the Saturday following it, I'm taking a tour to Shrewsbury, some of the delegates, to do the Darwin Walk, because, of course, where Charles Darwin was born is only a short distance from where I am now, and it's not far from Wolverhampton. So we're going to do the Darwin Walk and go to visit the actual bedroom where he was born in the Mount House. So it's quite a big, it's a big deal. And the SCH conference hasn't been in the UK since September 1989, when it took place during the World Congress of Herpetology down in Canterbury, Kent. And I attended that one as a steward. That was my first big international conference, and now here I am running the next one. So yeah, it's very exciting. But registration has closed. I'm afraid people can't buy tickets now. That's all closed. But the next one is it will be in Germany in 2 years' time, and the World Congress is in Borneo next year.
Wow. Will any of that be on live stream or any kind of network that chime in?
I don't know. I mean, over time, I would think that will occur. I don't know if that's going to happen from Kuching, Borneo for the World Congress. I mean, there's been 10 World Congresses, and I attended the first 5, and I've missed the others, unfortunately. So this will be the first one that I get back to. They're not generally, because you've usually got more than one session. You have 3 symposiums running at the same time, and people select what they want to go into just doors away.
Wow.
They're pretty intense. And then that's only 50% of it. 50% of anyone who's been to a reptile meeting in Europe or the US or anywhere, like I used to go to the NARBC shows. Those were reptile shows. We won't have any livestock. It's not a reptile show. It's
right. Purely symposium.
Yeah, but the networking is 50% of it, because you're meeting people, old friends, you're making new friends. And for us, we've got people looking for researchers to join their projects and people looking for projects to join. So it's a great intermeshing. And so the networking is as important as the actual presentations and the posters. So it's great fun. But as I say, I will need a lie down when it's over.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Anyway, crack on.
So now we know about the conference, let's just try and get some of your experiences out for people, because I know, most of us that listen to this podcast all grew up with O'Shea's Big Adventure, and it inspired so many of us. There's no two ways about it. It was groundbreaking. It was realistic. It wasn't TV faff like other shows around the time. So
it wasn't staged. It wasn't genuine.
That was the golden rule. That was
genuine.
That was the golden rule. And when I broached that to the executives, they were horrified.
Well,
because you didn't know if you're going to get a film out of it.
But I think that has stood the test of time where other things haven't. There was other counterparts at the time which were
but there were other counterparts at the time, one of whom was no longer here, who was a great advocate for conservation of reptiles and amphibians and did a tremendous amount of good.
Yeah, 100%. However, in a more enlightened age, with more, field herping becoming much more popular, and everyone having access to YouTube and putting their stuff on as it actually happens, I think your show, the original shows, still stand the test of time because of the realism. Everybody knows it wasn't staged, and I think the credibility of that is the beauty of it. Obviously, we'll like to see you crawl around in muck and whatever, but the credibility of it was the fact that it wasn't staged. It didn't matter if you didn't find anything,
right?
Well,
because we felt we was there with you.
Yeah, to give you an example. When I did the film looking for Salvador's monitor lizard in New Guinea, that was in the 2nd season, and they were only half-hour films then. So there's only so much you could put into that from what you found. And I was rather relieved when we didn't find it, because it meant the little python I had found, which was the first Antaresia ever recorded from New Guinea, didn't end up on the cutting room floor. If I'd found Salvador's monitor lizard, the directors and the editors would have cut that python out completely because it wasn't big. Now, I made this. My other maxim was it doesn't have to be big or dangerous to be an O'Shea target species. Even small species can be. They just have to have an interesting story. And that's why I made films about green-blooded skinks in New Guinea that literally bleed green, really alien. And I made a film about a luminous lizard in Trinidad that hadn't been seen since 1938. You know, these things are 3 inches long, but they're no less fascinating than a Komodo dragon or a king cobra.
That was one of my favourite episodes. The little skink was one of my favourite episodes. I still remember it.
One that always stood out to me was when you went down to find the hoplocephalus, excuse me, and you guys took the helicopter to the ridge, and there was nothing on the ridge, and like it was heart-wrenching. Yeah, it was also fascinating at the same time.
Yes, it was, because those ridges to set the scene, those are ridges in the Blue Mountains, and that's the hoplocephalus, the broad-headed snake lives in a rock-on-rock environment, never a rock-on soil. So it lives underneath exfoliated rocks, which is a great term, exfoliated. It's what the Daleks used to say, exfoliate. But that might not cross the channel so well. They live under exfoliated rock, but not exfoliated rock that's on soil. So they're not back where the tree line is and the grass is growing. They're out on the very, very edge. And we did find them, obviously, on where we started working because I was with John O'Webb, and he knew where he'd seen specimens, and we were going up and finding some that he could run his pit tag over and recognize. But it is a snake in trouble, and yet there are loads of ridges in the Blue Mountains, and you think, well, okay, if it was to disappear from here, not through collection, but more through people collecting bush rock for their gardens. There are signs by the road say bush rock collecting is illegal. Just like if you go through Arizona, they have signs saying collecting saguaro cactus is illegal. You know, they're protecting the environment. But we thought they'll be on the other ridges that people can't get to. But the ones we checked, they weren't. Now you go, well, why not? Possibly fire. And let's face it, they have a lot of wildfires. If fire destroyed a population, how is it going to reestablish? Where's it going to reestablish from? And so the picture looked more severe for that species than we may have thought of beforehand.
Yeah, very, very reminiscent of some of the Sky Island lepidus that we have in the Southwest here.
Yeah,
you have
one. Yeah, I know.
mountain.
I've spent time up on those Sky Islands, and you know, if you destroy all the wildlife above a certain, it only occurs at a certain elevation, it's not going to recruit from anywhere because they are islands, and they're hard to reach. So yes, it is a big concern, and it's something that all of us who value biodiversity need to think about. Yeah,
and you see that, Nipper, next time we go to the Sky Islands, we need a helicopter just to make it, real quick.
Need to travel in helicopter definitely. Now, I'm going to pin you down. Now we are. We've got you. So you mentioned Sky Islands. So let's talk about what venomous herping, field herping or research have you done in the US then?
Well, I've spent quite a lot of time in the US, but not so much going specifically for field herping. If I've gone across for a reptile show or to give a lecture or something like that, the host Herp Society like to take me out into the field. And that's really good fun. I remember going out with the guys from the Kansas Herp Society, and I'm trying to think. We must have finished making Big Adventure because I never had any time to do this sort of thing when I was doing Big Adventure, but can't have been long after that because we had 2 journalists from the newspapers tag on and follow us. We're catching garter snakes and copperheads and things like that. And we've got 2 journalists in tow writing articles about going herping with Mark O'Shea in Kansas or Missouri, which was quite bizarre.
That's incredible.
You sort of take, and we were on a railway line. We'd parked up and we're down on the railway line looking for decay snakes. And when we came back up to the cars, the state trooper was there and he wasn't too pleased with the way we parked our cars. But when I walked up, he recognized me and he wanted a selfie.
Really?
So it
That's
diffused,
incredible.
it diffused the situation completely.
That's incredible.
So, yes.
We need to be recognised more, Phil, because we do get a lot of attention from state troopers when we're out night cruising.
That we
and stuff
do.
like that.
State troopers and border patrol. With those reflective vests.
Well, if you're driving the roads in southern Arizona, 5 out of every 8 cars you see is border patrol, and they did stop us once. I was there with Wolfgang Wüster and David Nixon, and he pulled us over and he said, "What you doing? Are you snake?" And he realised we must be snake hunting. When he asked us, none of us spoke with an American accent. A German and 2 Brits. He realised we were looking for snakes, and he said, "You're doing all the things that raise red flags because they've got those great big masts and they're in cars covered so they can view the screen and they're watching." And he says, "You're doing everything that we watch for. You're driving slowly. You're stopping repeatedly. You're getting out and walking to the edge of the road and looking under bushes." So, yes, it did look like suspicious. But, yeah, it diffused again. Oh, there was a very, very funny story. I was out with Bob Ashley and some of the guys south of the Chiricahua Desert Museum. And we caught a western diamondback, and I wanted to photograph the western diamondback, and they wanted to carry on field herping. So they left me with my camera bag and my hat and the rattlesnake and a snake hook and a torch on a little lay-by the side of the road in the desert. And I'm just getting down to just photographing what for anyone there is a pretty boring rattlesnake. But yeah, I've photographed lots of western diamondbacks, but I just liked this one. I wanted to photograph it. And they'd all gone off. And I think the first vehicle to turn up was the sheriff. "What are you doing?" "I'm photographing a rattlesnake." "Where's your car?" "I haven't got one." "But you're miles from anywhere." "Yes, I know. I got dropped off by my friends." "Oh, don't you think that's a bit dangerous?" "Well, yeah, it could be, but that's all fine." Anyway, he went. Next up was state troopers. They got out. They're talking to me. I'm thinking, I'm never going to get this rattlesnake photograph. Third car was border patrol. And they're chatting to me. And then they had to go. They got a call. There's somebody they've got to go and arrest. So they took off in real fast and left me. Fourth car, group of herpers. They got to go, "Mark O'Shea, what are you doing here?"
Imagine being that fourth car. I can't fathom that. I can't fathom just driving down the highway and all of a sudden seeing, this guy with a blue snake hook and a brown cowboy hat on the side of the highway.
Australian, the hat.
Oh, well, forgive me.
Yeah, I was on the M40 runs from Birmingham to London. And I was going down to London with my partner one time, and I just pulled in. And at that time, when I was working for the safari park, West Midlands Safari Park, and I drove a Camel Trophy Discovery, and it had got West Midlands Safari Park on the wheel and all of that, and Mark O'Shea, curator of reptiles, on the front and stuff. And I just pulled in, and this vehicle pulled up alongside, and these 5 British lads got out, and they go, "I don't believe it. We spent 6 months on holiday in Australia, and we come back home, and here you are." And I said, "That's because I'm British." "Are you?"
That's great. That's awesome.
So have you seen many of the Crotalus in the US?
Yes, I've seen quite a few species. Christ, if I was to list them, I have seen a lot. Atrox adamantius. We did a film on Horridus, of course, which we called Nemesis, because it was the species that had almost switched my lights out in 1993 after a very bad bite. Yeah.
Where did you get? Not where on you? Whereabouts in the US did
At
you
the
get?
safari park, fortunately.
Oh,
if I'd been bitten in the field by that, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
It was a female as fat as my wrist, prey-taking bite when I was feeding the male, and she'd manoeuvred, and I never saw the strike. Never saw it. All I saw was her. I felt something light brush my wrist, and I was using tongs and everything with the male, but she was off to and she'd maneuvered, and it was a hell of a strike across the distance, right across my field of vision. I felt something brush my wrist, didn't feel any pain or anything, but she was resetting her fangs, so that meant she'd done something. And I looked at my wrist, and I turned it over and looked at the underside, and there was a nice big D of the teeth of the lower jaw. So you knew the upper jaw had contact. He turned it back, and then 2 blood spots came up an inch apart. And I knew it was going to be bad because she was obviously hungry, because I was feeding them. And so I locked them all up and got the anti-venom and drove to the main office, because I didn't have a phone. I got a phone in there soon afterwards, believe me. But and raised the alarm, and I came to with paramedics working on me. Oh, it was serious. Wow. I nearly died in the ambulance. It's a long story, but one rattlesnake tried to kill me. 32 kept me alive.
Wow.
Now that'll puzzle you.
Yeah, right.
At that time, there were 32 species of rattlesnakes. I know the numbers change. A species is synonymized, a new species described. And species that were subspecies are elevated. But there were 32 at the time in the 2 genera. And people do memory tests. It's always a good idea. You know, I can do the states of the United States. It's not difficult. You know, the states of Brazil, etc. And I used to just challenge myself to remember things like this. And one of the ones I used to do was the 32 species of rattlesnakes in Latin. And I know that I will get to 29 really quite quickly. And then I'll think, I know there's another one begins with M, and there's another one begins with so-and-so. And I'll be trying to work them out, and I'll get annoyed with myself because I can't remember them. And when I knew that if I went to sleep in the ambulance, I was going to die, and I knew I had to stay conscious, I did that. And I was still trying to figure the last one when they wheeled me off into the hospital. The funny thing was that I actually watched that too. I watched that from above. I watched myself being taken off the ambulance, past the police motorcycle outriders that had escorted it on a bank holiday, and past my parents and into the hospital. I had an out-of-body experience. So I think I was pretty close. That was the worst one. So when we decided to make a film about timber rattlesnakes, which is a species in dire need of help, it got called Nemesis because it nearly was mine.
Wow.
They're still my favorite North American rattlesnake. Well, them and blacktails. I do like blacktails as well. And I've kept blacktails, and I've found blacktails in the wild, and found a really interesting blacktail in Mexico, which should have been, it was in the range of the basiliscus, but it keyed out to me to a blacktail. Very, very odd. Somebody told me along this, he says, oh, there's a boa constrictor lives, this is in Sonora, Mexico, around Alamos, where you can't go now because of the narco-traficantes. But he says in that cliff, there's a boa constrictor lives in that hole. So I climbed up, and I'm working my way along to find this jerboa. I'm looking straight at a rattlesnake looking at me. And I thought, your snake identification is not great. But I caught it, and I thought, this looks like a blacktail, but it's just too close to the coast for the range. So I've got photographs of it. So it might be a hybrid between basiliscus and molossus. I don't know. Yeah, I got two on that.
Did it look like a basiliscus with like a black tail, or?
Yeah, it got a black tail. Yeah, it had. But it was. If you'd put it in front and said, what's that? You'd have gone, oh, it's a molossus. You might not have said which subspecies. Oxarchus, of course, has been elevated now. You might not have said nigrescens or molossus, but you'd have gone molossus, and it shouldn't have been. But then, well, who knows? But yeah, I found plenty of rattlesnakes when we were in Mexico. Although we drove the full length of Baja California when we were filming there, and it was moonlight all the bloody way, and I got one road-killed Enyo.
Damn.
You know, and that is. I went down there with Lee Grisma, and you know that's
Yeah.
it should be any number, but it just proves you won't find snakes on moonlit nights.
Yeah, yeah.
Or crocs.
How big was the Enyo? How large was the Enyo that you found?
Small. Well, they are small snake, but it was small, and it had been run over. So that was it.
Well, despite it not being venomous, any Bogertophus while you were down there?
No. But we did go out to the islands and found Estebanensis.
Nice.
And the rattlesnake catalinensis. We found 3 of those.
Very cool.
All females. What else? So working off the roads at night turned up rattlesnakes, but not actually road cruising. And that would have been a great road. For me, you know, the best thing that we found down there, Lee turned up with at the very end, right down at the tip, Bipes biporus, the amphispenian that looks like a penis with arms. The Mexicans have some very odd views about those. I know somebody who's done work down there and was looking for him. The Mexicans thought he was a pervert because they believe that they do crawl up your anus.
Oh,
so
I've only seen them in captivity. I think they look amazing.
They are yeah. I have a fascination for fossorial species more than venomous.
Yes.
Anything, amphispanians, Cecilians, which my colleague Simon Maddow works on.
I'm going to just leave you to talk to Phil, because Phil's big love in life is fossorial snakes.
Oh yeah,
he just has a collection of dirt in drawers as far.
Yes, I'm all for that. I don't have a collection of anything these days. It's not been practical, but people say to me, if you could keep something, what would you have? Well, I think if I was going to have something that was visible, I'd probably be monkey tail skinks, because I've always loved them and I've kept them before and I've bred them. I might have, but if I was going to keep snakes, I don't think it'd be green tree pythons. I think it'd be something you couldn't see.
Yeah.
Because I would want to find out a way of monitoring something about his natural history that would ultimately be publishable.
You see that nipper? You see that? You see that nipper? So, Mark, I have a very small collection of Atractaspis from West Africa.
Oh, yeah, I love those knots.
And you slip that knot in there right at the end. And everyone makes fun of me for my containers full of dirt.
Yes,
but I am logging every bit of information that I can observe.
Fascinating.
And it's been a hell of a 2 years watching piles of dirt. I'll tell you that.
Yes.
But I can't get enough of it.
And the point is that there is a simple way of responding to your detractors. Ask them to pick up a handful and let it run through their fingers.
Exactly.
Because I know what that feels like. But we're not onto Africa yet.
So we're not in Africa, but I will say this before we digress too much and we slip more into the Americas. So my friends and I that do keep fossorial stuff, you know, centipede eaters and calabar pythons and some of the other small. I mean, myself, I have a macrolaps as well, but
really? Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I don't. I need to get more information because I don't think I'm keeping it right. But again, we'll say that for Africa. But
I've only ever caught one.
Excellent. Well, I definitely have to hear about that. But we call it the dirt snake mafia. So anybody who keeps fossorial stuff, you are now part of the dirt snake mafia. Just so you're an honorary member, sir.
Thank you. That is a group that I feel that is so overlooked generally because Well, I guess the reptile shops, they put a pile of dirt and a snake in the cage. No, people just walk past it thinking he's cleaning.
Yeah.
You haven't got to be able to see it. And you see, what I'd like to be able to do is find some way of keeping something in some form of, I think you can do it now, like small beads, where you can actually monitor the way it's crawling. The late, great Carl Gans spent a lot of time working on fossorial species, and particularly on shield tails, which is another group that fascinate me from South India and Sri Lanka. And the way that they burrow and move forwards is fascinating. And they've got a pointed head and they push forwards and make a narrow hole in the earth. And then they draw the body forwards to widen the gap. And the whole vertebrae is corkscrewed then. And then they'll get a purchase and push forwards again. And all the time, the shield tail is blocking the exit with dirt on the hooks. So, I mean, these sort of adaptations are really interesting. And if people were doing the same sort of observations on fossorial species that they do very well on arboreal species and terrestrial species and so forth, we'd be learning a lot, because a lot is learned and published by the private community of serious herpetoculturists who spend a lot of their money and even more of their time observing their animals, when often that's not possible for more, certainly zoo herpetologists and people like that, where they've got to manage a public collection and things. So there is so much input that could come from the private community. The serious, I'm not talking pet keepers, I'm talking the serious herpetoculturists.
Absolutely.
I think you need to send Mark a t-shirt that says Dirt Snake Mafia.
It's going to happen.
Oh, I will wear it. I will wear it. I will lecture to my students wearing it and get you a photograph.
Excellent. Excellent. Awesome. It's in the works.
So
back to the Americas, Nipper. Sorry.
Back to the Americas. I know we've diverted a little bit over the border into Mexico.
Mexico is North America.
Excuse me.
South America starts the Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
See, Phil? I told you.
I see in my mind.
There are three Mexican states. I think it's three that are Latin American, South American, really, because Middle America or Central America, or what you want to call it, is a bit of a construct. You've got the Nearctic and South America colliding. That isthmus is there. Now the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, everything north of that should be North America, everything south of that should be South America.
See, I just figured we started the stories in Kansas, then we went to Arizona, now we're in Mexico. I'm just letting him go south.
Yeah, I might surprise you and sort of no, because I was up catching. I was talking about timber rattlesnakes, and we went to some fantastic dens up in Wisconsin. And I went out with Steve Beaupre, who'd got in Arkansas, who'd got a fantastic method of his rattlesnakes. With their radio tracking devices and everything, were actually beaming every time they were in line of sight. They would beam all the information to a data collector that he got in a locked unit on the hillside. And we were out, and he knew where all these snakes were. It was fascinating. I mean, the guys are doing in the States, monitoring snakes. I wish we could do that in a lot of other parts of the world. Fantastic. And I bet it's come on. That's 20 years ago, for God's sake.
Yeah, it's got to be fresh now.
Oh, I'll tell you a funny story, another one. But it is when we've been out with Steve Beaupre, right? We've got about 5 SUVs. Steve Beaupre and his students, myself and my film crew. And we're going to be out throughout the day and into the early evening. So we're wearing the usual stuff you wear in the field, which tends to be a bit camo, a bit of a mix match. And we were racing back to Little Rock in a row of cars, and we pulled in for gas. And we're buying gas. And this girl who'd been buying gas and had just gone in and paid came over to me and said, your cover's slipped. I said, excuse me, what do you mean? And she recoiled when she heard my accent. She expected me to be an American. And she said, your cover's slipped. And she started pointing at one of the vehicles. She says, my father's a colonel in the National Guard. He'd want me to tell you your cover's slipped. And then she was obviously put off because she thought it was some sort of joint operation. And she beetled back to it and she drove away. And I thought, what's she talking about? I walked over to the car and it was one the director was it driving. And he'd taken off his sweatshirt and he'd thrown it in the back and it was up against the window and you could just read some of the writing and it said FBI, Federal Bureau of Intoxication, but you couldn't see the intoxication part. And great. She must have really thought that we were out doing something. We were an FBI and British security unit operating covertly in Arkansas. And I suddenly realized why she was, and when she heard why she recoiled when she heard my accent and it wasn't American. She thought she'd walked into something bigger than she could cope with, and she was gone. And she's probably still telling the story to this day.
That's great. That's great.
So I was saying, what about coral snakes? Phil and I love a coral snake.
So do I. So do I. And on that occasion when I was photographing the Western Diamondback, Bob Ashley and the other lads did remember to come back for me, and they had caught what I most wanted to see, which is Microroides euryxanthus. They're
excellent.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
And I wanted to obviously photograph this. And of course, they're not easy snakes to photograph because they hide their heads as soon as you shine a torch at them. So I figured they are. Yeah, I couldn't do this there by the side of the road. So we went back to the motel room and I went into the bathroom and I put a plug in the bath and I built a set in the bath and I got it, turned the light off and got in. I got a little mini mag light.
Excellent.
Just with, you can have it so it's a candle. It looks like a
right.
And I got that. And that was just throwing enough light for me to just be able to see. And I got the coral snake and I set him up on the set in the bath. And I got superlative photos and he wasn't hiding at all. And
That's awesome.
The next time I was over there, they got another one and I got great tail curl.
Oh, really?
And yes, I wish I could have photographed the cloacal popping because I have to say that did not frighten me one bit. I do not think that a coral snake farting is really going to be a good defense.
No. Well, Nipper and I had the pleasure of finding one on our trip to our most recent trip to Arizona, and we did not hear the cloacal farting. Excuse me, but a couple of the other guys.
What we call that, incidentally? Do you know what farting is over here?
What's that, sir?
And it has been for far longer than it was seen relevant.
What do you
Trumping.
got? Trumping. Excellent.
Nipper's nodding. He's a Brit.
That's cool.
Anyway, carry on.
No, I was just saying this. I feel like it's such a misunderstood and very few people appreciate it. And then the people don't realize how difficult it is to really find one and see one. And what an honor it is to be a member of that club in itself,
Yeah. Well, I haven't found either of the two that I've photographed, so I still have to find one. But when I was in South America, I was working for the Royal Geographical Society in 1987-88 on a big project in the north of the Amazon in what was then a territory, the territory of Roraima. It's now a state. I was there when they had they found gold and there was a mad gold rush and people were flying in. They were crashing planes in the jungle to go and gold mine and stuff. It changed the place. It got quite dangerous. Somebody shot the mayor, all sorts of things. And they had new elections. And I was walking down the street one day and they got vote so-and-so, obviously in Portuguese. and one of the candidates had said, vote Hitler. I wish we had little cameras that we could have taken a picture, because I hadn't got my cameras. And that's the kind of thing you would definitely pull out your camera phone and take.
Of course.
Vote Hitler. Hitler was running. There was a Hitler in the 1980s running for mayor of Boavista.
Wow.
So that's bizarre. And it tied in with a guy I met in Honduras in 1985, who I think actually was SS. But that's another story. While I was working on that project out on this island in the jungle, the Ile de Maracá, 100,000 hectares, I did catch a couple of coral snakes. I got Lemniscatus, but I think it was Lemniscatus diuteus, which is now a full species, I think. And I got Hemprichi. But I spent 7 months on that project in the jungle. 5 months in the wet season, 2 months in the dry season. I recorded 32 or 33 species of snakes, fewer lizards, but I still, and quite a lot of frogs. But
how was the Hemprichi? I've never seen one in person.
A very pretty little snake, but
Yeah.
I couldn't keep them for long because I wasn't trying to keep them. I was photographing, documenting, and in those days I was doing very little museum collecting. So they were being documented and released back in the reserve.
Excellent.
But I've seen so few. Even when I was in Central America, I didn't see many coral snakes. Nigricinctus in Honduras. Trying to think.
I'm trying to remember. There was a photo in one of your books of I think Surinamensis. With the
that's not my photo. Yeah,
oh, okay.
That is a very. Now, who was I talking to only a couple of days ago? Let me think. Was it Nick Vidal or Patrick David? Because I've just been working in the Paris Museum. Excellent. And I went out for a beer with Nick Vidal, and I think it was Nick Vidal, and he was talking about his love of Micrurus and Surinamensis, especially, and how it was because he's found them in French Guiana. He's found quite a few corals in French Guiana. People don't appreciate.
They don't.
When you see the coral snakes in North America, Fulvius and Tenaire and Euryxanthus, you start thinking that coral snakes are small. This Surinamensis is a 2 meter thumping great coral snake.
Easily.
You could put your finger down its throat. Not that I'd recommend you did that, but there you go.
Well, my good friend and I had one that was probably about, I don't know, maybe 2.5, almost 3 foot, almost a meter. And and we wound up getting it to eat some frozen thawed snakes after we had soaked them, and we gave it a big basin. It never swam. It never
really
water.
The aquatic bit, but they're supposed to eat eels as well, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we got probably about 4 or 5 snakes in it naturally on its own, in terms of just using a hemostat to simulate the moving of the cadaver, and it ate 4 or 5, and then it just slowly went downhill, probably because it was stress and parasites and whatever else. But incredible animals, incredible.
Yeah, if we get to talking about the Pacific, I'll tell you about the most parasitized snakes that I've seen in museums, which are from there. But yes, I mean, coral snakes aren't all the same diet. Some are very, very specific. Some specialize. Hemprichis, I think, feeds on Peripatus, Onchophorans. There are several that feed on primarily on Thessalians. So there are some pretty specialized, and you'd have to have, because if you've got an area with 4 or 5 coral snakes in tropical America, there's this little thing called resource partitioning, which was the first paper I ever read on that was by Christine Toft in Copia, and it was published in 78 or 80 or something, and it really got me thinking when I was in the field, because if you have 2 species that do exactly the same thing in exactly the same place at exactly the same time, they're going to compete. Therefore, if one has just a 0.1% advantage over the other species over time, and we've had plenty of it leading up to now, that one will have pushed the other one out. It'll have outcompeted it. Therefore, species that are closely related, existing in the same habitat, have either got to be active at different times, active in different locations. Like with Candoya, you get an arboreal one and terrestrial one. They've got to be feeding on different prey or different size classes of prey. These sort of things are really, really important. And this resource partitioning sets you thinking when you're looking at very diverse assemblages of snakes. How are they all existing without tripping over each other, metaphorically speaking, of course?
Right. We've actually, my friends and I have discussed this, where certain areas of the southeastern United States, you'll have a small area of land that you'll find copious amounts of Regina, and then right next to it will be Tentilla, but you'll never find Regina where Tentilla are, and vice versa. And then if you add Micrurus in there, well, you won't find Regina or Tentilla because the Micrurus is most likely eating them both.
Most likely eating both of them, yeah. But the Tentilla and the Regina are partitioning the habitat there.
Right.
And I think that's like, I work on Toxicocalamus in New Guinea, which is an elapid that eats earthworms.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, we are. But I was going to just say that the Vogelkop I've looked at all the known specimens in museums now. I'm about 16 short of the 528.
Wow.
There've been none recorded from the Vogelkop, the bird's head of New Guinea, because depending if you're a herpetologist or an ornithologist, you see New Guinea as a sleeping monitor lizard or a sleeping bird. And it's got a head and a tail. Well, generally, the Vogelkop, that means bird's head. And that's the big western peninsula. And I've no Toxicocalamus records from there, but I do have Calamophis records from there, which is a homolopsid, terrestrial fangless homolopsid that eats earthworms. And I've now actually seen all of the known specimens in museums of Calamophis. And I found 3 that people have got as Brachyurus. So so I've actually increased. There are now 9 specimens known in collections. There were only 6 before I started poking around in museum jars. But yeah, they're not in the same place because presumably they would compete.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to drag you back.
Sorry.
So we'll allow you. So you've gone through Mexico now. We're going to allow you Central America.
You're after me SS story, aren't you?
I am after that. Does sound like an amazing story. I can't lie.
Good. That's
so
good.
I was on an expedition, an Operation Raleigh expedition in 1985, and I was running the herp survey for 3 months on this project, and we got youngsters. Operation Raleigh was something done in the 80s for youngsters between 17 and 24 to do adventurous scientific and community challenges, multinational. I mean, I had 2 Omanis on my team, desert Arabs on my team in Honduras and various others. And I was running a herp project, which involved obviously surveying what we were finding around the coastal area where we were based, but also patrols into the jungle, sometimes for 10 days and things like that, carrying everything. And this village we were staying in was very infrequently visited from anyone from outside. But there was a German, an elderly German living there, and he said his name was Herman Bock. And Herman was married to a very young black Garifuna girl, local girl. And he didn't speak Garifuna, or claimed not to, and she didn't speak German. And you could tell which was his house because it was the one with the razor wire around the fence. So anyway, I got talking to him because he was interested in what I was doing. And he wanted me, he'd got a little private island off the coast, and he wanted me to pretend to release snakes on the island. He didn't want me to actually release snakes on the island because he wanted to go there, but he didn't want the Garifuna going there. So he wanted me to make out that I was releasing all the venomous snakes I was catching. That's hilarious. On this island, right? But finding out a bit about him, he had come up to Honduras where he was an expert in Amerindian art, and he was the minister of tourism for an area with zero tourism. And he'd been there a long time, and he'd come up from Paraguay. And he had gone to Paraguay from Germany at some speed in the 1940s. So was he fleeing from before the rise or after the fall? But he was about 60 when I met him in 1985. So we'll do the math. I reckon Herman was hiding from something.
Very cool. Very interesting story. I love it.
I can't prove it, but he's dead now anyway.
Yeah. So, have you done much herping in Central America? What venomous?
Yes, I have. I've been Honduras, Belize, Costa Rica. Yeah, that's it in Central America. I've been to more countries in South America. I've been to Venezuela, Guyana, Peru, Brazil, Trinidad, Argentina. That's probably, yeah. To say Venezuela, yeah. So, but yeah, Costa Rica is obviously the Mecca. It's the Mecca not just because it's got such a diverse herpetofauna, because it's right where the overlap zone between northern and southern herpetofaunas overlap, plus all the stuff that is very, very Central American in its distribution. But it's also the country most set up for Western tourism, if you like. English is very often spoken, whereas you go to many other Latin American countries, less so. Even Belize, which was British Honduras, that's not set up for tourism at all. I didn't spend much time in Belize, but I had a late friend of mine spent a lot of time in Belize and caught some very interesting species there. But I was out on the Keys catching iguanas and things like that. But Costa Rica is excellent. Whether you're going to find much new, well, if you were looking for something new there, you'd need to go up the mountains, and very likely there are undescribed frogs, microtiids, vipers, and so forth on the mountains. So you'd need to move away from the coast where everyone seems to go. And it is not easy to find bushmasters there. And I haven't.
Yeah. I feel like so many people go to Costa Rica for all the reasons you just said, but there's a small group that really, really wants to find lachesis. And I just, they're fascinating to me, but I feel like there's so many other amazing localities and other species that in South America that
yes, you could spend a lot of time looking for lachesis on the Ossa Peninsula and come back disappointed.
Yeah,
and not have seen a lot of other species. You find lachesis when the time's right, and I mean I caught one in the Atlantic coastal forests of Brazil, and that was awesome. Very exciting, and that was the first film of a big adventure. And the late Dean Reaper wrote that we'd set it up. And we were well pissed because we absolutely went by my rule, golden rule, and we'd spent 10 days in 3 states looking for the Atlantic coastal bushmaster and been unsuccessful. And it was the last day, and we're searching in Quebrangulu in Bahia State, and again, no luck. And we're thinking of packing down because we're flying out the next day. And we're going to fail on the first film.
Yeah.
And we had got one earlier bushmaster that which had been found on the road, which we just used for the head of the show, just so you knew what a bushmaster looked like. But we never sort of set out to say that we had caught that or anything like that. Right. We were out to look for one, and we were really, really disappointed. We're going to fail on the first film. And that afternoon it rained, and then as it was going dark it stopped raining, and I said to the director, look, let's break the kit again, let's get out there. And we rounded up everybody out of our team, which was we work with small, the film crew is very small, unlike a lot of film crews. Natural history, you need a small team,
right?
But we got other people from the village and things like this, and we all just went out and searched in the forest. And we'd got a chap with us from a company called Neon Rio, and they were like fixers. They were the people who sorted out our hotels, our flights and everything. So we didn't have to stress with all of that. And also they would arrange local permissions and things. And he came out, and he was quite a smart Rio de Janeiro lad. You know, he wouldn't get dirty. You know, but he's out with us. And he spoke perfect English. He'd grown up in the US. Spoke English with a bit of an American accent, but Excellent. It wasn't his first language. And come midnight on the last day, I'm thinking, well, I really hoped the rain would have brought something out.
Right.
And I'm just walking around the group through the forest saying, we're going to pack it in. We're not going to find it. And I heard him shout me. And he shouted Mark, and then he shouted to me in Portuguese, Sorocucu, Sorocucu. And we all ran over to where he was, and there was a sub-adult male bushmaster backing up and getting onto a stump.
Wow.
And I looked to the Brazilian I was with, who was my contributor, and said, are you going to catch it or I'm going to catch it?
Yeah,
and he
right.
said, you catch it. So I said, okay. And then he caught it. But I didn't care. Who cares?
It doesn't matter. It was there. You were there.
I mean,
that's a
my
hell of a
contributors
story.
used to look to me and say, have I got to catch it? You're going to, I don't care. If we're working as a team.
Yeah.
It's not whether I personally am the person who that's not the point. We're one, as long as one of us gets it. This happened with a small croc in Mauritania, and Hemo Nickel said to me, shall I catch it? You're closest, you catch it.
Yeah. Or the one Antaresia.
Don't wait for me to come over. I'm not some sort of like, you're not, that's prima donna sort of thing. But anyway, we did get it. We got it at midnight, and we had to get back and pack everything up and get no sleep and ready for the flight out the next day. And we were over the moon. And then for Dean Reaper to publish in the bulletin of the Chicago Herpetological Society that we had staged it. What a cheek.
A shame.
Yeah.
But you got it. And it's an iconic story.
Yeah, it was, and it said that we didn't then fail on a film till number 7. And that was Costa Rica, and that was Splendid Leaf Frog. And we heard them call, and then it rained and it stopped. They stopped calling, and we didn't get that. And the director was really downcast about that. And I said, look, Roger, you've got to fail sometimes. That's life.
Yeah.
Just not on the one you're working on at that time, because it never sits well. But we got to film 9, and then we failed on the Splendid Leaf Frog with Andy Gray from the Manchester Museum. And at the end of that, because Andy Gray needed them for the project at the Manchester Museum, he'd got collectors out, and they'd been to somewhere where we couldn't get the film crew, and they caught a pair, and they brought them in. And the morning that we're finishing, there's these 2 beautiful Splendid Leaf Frogs.
Excellent.
And I held them up and showed them to the camera. I said, this is what we were looking for. We didn't find any, but some collectors have found a pair for Andy Gray, so the project that he's working on can continue. It's just that we didn't find them, because honesty is important.
Yeah. 1,000%. Incredible. That's awesome.
So, any other particularly memorable venomous encounters in South America?
Yeah. The southernmost snake in the world. The Patagonian lance head.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Let's hear it.
I'd done a film. Well, I mean, how can I nearly missed out there talking about golden lanceheads on Ilha Camada Grande, but I'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that.
I knew Marcio Martins for a long time, because when I did the work in Brazil in the 80s, I passed the frog specimens to him, and he wrote all the frogs. I'm not as good on frog taxonomy, well, certainly not compared to snakes. So he did all of that, and we'd corresponded quite a lot, and there's a lot of mutual respect. And he was one of the contributors on the the Golden Lancehead film, which was Lost Worlds. And when he heard we were going to Argentina to look for the Patagonian lancehead, he was very interested because he'd done work on a similar, the snake that in Brazil that occupies the same niche is Bothrops idipatingae, and he'd done work on them, and he would really like to see what their Brazilian counterpart was like. So I spoke to the director and said, can we take Marcio with us? And so we did. We took him with us. And we're on this we're on the Peninsula Valdez looks like a mushroom growing out of Argentina into the Atlantic Ocean. Now you'll picture it easily on a map. And that's not as far south as they go. They go further south, but obviously they become harder and harder to find. And we had already spent a lot of time around Buenos Aires state and a number of other states in northern Argentina, which were within the range of the Patagonian lancehead. But the range is vast. It covers the entire Patagonia, which is just immense. And of course, like any snake of this sort, they're going to be patchy and they're going to be in certain areas. If you think about viper distribution, they're not evenly spread. They tend to be centered. And finding those centers is the hard thing. And we'd been singly unsuccessful again until we got down to Peninsula Valdez. And we were unloading the vehicles. And it was a really nice scene that I could. We're right on the coast. There's lots of rocks. There's penguins on the rocks. You can see the Atlantic Ocean, and I just left them sorting gear, and I just thought I'm going for a walk. And I walked up the coast, and it was just like walking up the Welsh coast. Although we don't have penguins in Wales, of course.
No, not so much.
No, penguins are puffins maybe, but not penguins. But I'm walking along, and it was quite like being at home, the temperature and everything. And I thought, now if I was looking for vipers on the Welsh cliffs, how would I go about it? And I thought to myself, well, probably I'd look for where there's an abundance of prey. So where I'm not seeing lizards, I wouldn't bother. I'd move to where I did see lizards. So I applied that, and I was walking around. And I started to see Laolimus, and this is the biggest genus. I think it's in Latin America. There's over 300 species of Laolimus. There's probably even more than that now because they've been described all the time. A lot of them are Andean, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of Patagonian. And I started to see a fair number of those. So I thought, right, I'm going to work now and think about looking for vipers, how I would do that. And blow me, I found a female Patagonian lancehead. Wow. And I'm going, wow, I found a female here. Waving to the crew, come and see the female. And everyone's just blown away, you know. And Marcio, he just thought, this is tremendous. So he set off and he found a male.
Wow.
And then some hours later, I found a juvenile.
Fantastic.
And that was it. No more.
That's amazing.
You have to think, how would I best search? Moving back, because I know you're going to the Golden Lanceheads. That was a trip. Yeah. Illico Murder Grande is not easy to get to. We had 3 attempts. With 2 attempts by boat. The first time it was too rough to go anywhere. We were out at sea and it was terrible when we came back. The second time we got out to the island and went round it, but it was too rough to safely land. So we had to go back. So that we decided we'll hire a helicopter.
Wow.
As you do.
Yes.
But while that was being sorted out, we thought, well, we'll go to Alcatrazes. Now, this isn't the one in California. This is Alcatrazes means booby, which is one of the seabirds.
Right.
And there's a Bothrops on there. And I went with Marcio he's from the University of Sao Paulo, and a bunch of guys from the Institute of Butantan, especially Kiko Franco, who's a great laugh, tremendous guy, lovely man. And we were going to go to Camada Grande, but while that's been set up, we went to Alcatraz's, and there's a pit viper there that they're going to describe as a new species. So they set off, the Brazilians, they set off to look for the snake. Why we called this Lost Worlds was because when you got onto these islands, there were no mammals. The things you saw mostly were frigate birds and other big, aggressive-looking seabirds that could be pterodactyls, and giant spiders and things like that. It was quite a primeval-looking place, and the Brazilians had gone off to look for the pit viper that they wanted more specimens of to describe. And I couldn't go straight away because the cameraman wanted to play with a new kind of camera, which he called a lipstick camera, which go in a headband around and over my ear. Well, now, this sort of stuff is like, you do it with a GoPro, but they didn't exist 20 years ago. Yeah. Over 20 years ago. So he's rigging this lipstick camera up, and I've got this hunking great big unit it feeds into in my backpack. And it takes 20 minutes, half an hour to get all this and test it and run it and see what we've got. And I'm itching to go snake hunting, but I'm being all rigged up for this. So that's all sorted. And I set off this flat rock, which was our base right by our boat. Oh, and I should tell you that Ilha Alcatrazes is actually the Brazilian Navy use it for artillery practice. And we'd asked them not to for 2 days while we're there. And they'd kindly said that they wouldn't shoot at us, because those are big bullets.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a shame that they're using something like that. Maybe they're not now, because there's an endemic pit viper on there. But anyway, I set off, and I remember going over this big rock, hopping across a little bit of seawater onto a flat rock. And then I walked up into the start of the forest. And as I walked up into the start of the forest, there were 2 palm trees that seemed to almost have a common base and were leaning away from each other like a large V. And as I got around the back, there was an awful lot of debris in that V that had fallen, bits of palm frond and all bark and all sorts of stuff. And I got my snake hook, and I've got this camera in it. I've got this snake hook, and I just folded out some of this material, and this piece of palm frond that was like, they're often hollow, so it looks like a tube, half of a tube, and that dropped down, and into it slid the soon-to-be named Bothrops alcatrazi.
Wow,
that's incredible.
I found one in under 10 minutes
on the first flip.
And the Brazilian lads, when they came back, fair play, they'd been working hard, but they hadn't got one. I've got you one, guys. Here you go. I've got described a few years later. So but we did get to Queimada Grande, and they're not lying when they say that place is alive with golden lanceheads. I counted how many I saw in a little over an hour, and it was 16.
Wow.
And they were on the ground, and they were in the trees, and basically don't put your hand anywhere without looking first. Yeah. I think there has been a bite now. One of the researchers who works out there has been bitten. It's because it's very, very toxic, and it's very toxic because it feeds on birds. On the mainland, the pit vipers, just think of any average pit viper. It sits there in ambush, nice warm furry goes past it, whacks it one, sits back, stab and release bite, resets his fangs, looks at his watch and goes, yeah, it should be about dead by now. Then it crawls after it and eats it. If you're feeding on birds, you can't do that because there's nothing to track, because a bird's going to go flutter up in the air. You've got a gap, so you're not going to be able to track. So
Right.
they've got to hold on to their prey. They've got longer fangs, apparently. I don't know how true that is, and a more toxic venom because you've got feet and beaks and wings going. They've got to subdue their prey very, very quickly, and so that makes perfect sense. And they're supposed to be, I think, 3 times more toxic to mammals than anything on the mainland, and 5 times to birds.
Wow.
If those stats are right. But they, they are reputedly the most venomous snake from Crotalus auridus down to Bothrops amiditoides.
Wow. And definitely the most toxic of all the Bothrops, Bothriechis, all that.
Although you don't know what you might find on other islands where you've got the same environment. I mean, little rattlers rattlesnakes are feeding on birds. They're having to hunt them at night. Hence, they don't want the rattle because it's like a bell around a cat's neck.
Yeah.
So, if they're taking birds at night and they're not very big snakes, what's their toxin like?
Yeah. Has there been, on the Goldens, has there been many observations of predation in the wild? In terms of, is it a strike and release and the bird just kind of falls over, or are they holding on to it like a bit is?
I think they hold on to them. Okay. But don't take my word for it. Yeah. I'm sure because the Brazilians have been studying them for a long time. Right. Both people like Marcio out of Institute the Universidade de Sao Paulo and Kiko Franco and his colleagues. And there's a good group of herpetologists at Instituto Butantan. So they I would think that observational studies are a big part of what they do. So I would think there is.
Yeah, there was a guy who had a bunch of trail cams on something from Butantan, and there was no actual observation. It was just like the snake would slither past the camera, and that was it. So yes, but those guys are really working hard. I know they are.
Yes. But if you don't get any results for a long time, when you do get the results, it makes them even sweeter.
Absolutely.
Success and failure are 2 sides of the same coin, and to truly appreciate the one, you have to taste the other.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. So I'm going to take you from South America now. Let's travel around. What about Indian subcontinent?
Right. Which well, of course, I caught king cobras down in the Western Ghats, and I've spent a lot of time on Sri Lanka. I remember tangling my feet up and falling into some brushwood, and I'm picking myself up in Sri Lanka, and I thought I saw a snake's tail. So I got up carefully, and it was Hypnali. And I moved where I'd fallen, and I found 5.
Wow.
I found 5. I just throw myself into these Hypnali. They'll break my fall for me. They've got quite a pokey venom that can affect your kidneys. It's not something to get tagged by. But yes, I mean, I've caught lots of cobras, Russell's vipers, some crates, but you don't see as many of those. But lots and lots of cobras. And when we went up to it's Odisha province now. It was Orissa province in northeast India. We were looking for king cobras in the Bitacarnica swamp there, and people told me that they nested in the trees, and I thought, I've got to see a snake that can gather leaves together in a tree. But we didn't. We found very few snakes. I found myself chasing more monitor lizards in mud, or rather standing still while the monitor lizards ran away. But one incident there's the river. It's not a snake story, unfortunately, but the river converges, and on the mud bank there's a really humongous saltwater crocodile, and he's supposed to be like the saltwater crocodile in that area. And when you come up the river, there he is, and he sits there, and do you want to mess with me, sort of thing. And he slid into the water, and the director said, let's follow him. And I was saying, really? We're in a bloody canoe. We're in a dugout canoe type thing. It's about as wide as you can sit down. You can't turn round. and it's long, and it's the kind of thing that you'd only have to do 3 rocks and it's upside down. And he wants us to chase the biggest saltwater crocodile in the area in it. And yeah, he did. He wanted us. So we're following this saltwater crocodile, and it disappeared. And he was very disappointed because he'd got the cameraman filming it. And I looked over my shoulder. Yeah, it had disappeared. Either it had disappeared or there were 2 of them, because we were now being followed. And I thought, this is not a good situation to be in. You'd only have to nudge the damn thing. We found we came across it's in the film, I think, a cow that had obviously drowned and fallen into the river. And this bloated cow is going downstream, and it's doing this up and down, pulled under, coming up again. I thought, that's not the water current. That's crocodiles. Yeah,
it's mad.
There's some big crocs up there. And when I traveled across the north of India, and the Indian train system is very efficient. It's always on time. They do not stop, even if all the people on the roof fall off. It's very efficient. And we're on the train, and there was an army regiment, Indian army regiment on the train, or a battalion, quite a few soldiers getting on. While we're on the platform, the colonel in charge with his lady recognized me, turned out to be a fan. He said, you must come and sit with me and tell me your stories. So I spent most of the journey across the north of India, sat with the colonel and his good lady wife, regaling him with stories in his private compartment on this train.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Going back to the Raj, it's really quite bizarre.
Well, so other than the pocket full of hypnoli in Sri Lanka, any work with Trigonocephalus?
No. I only saw one, and that was somebody else had caught, so I managed to just get photos. It's not a species that I could have lay any claim to having really encountered, which is a shame, because it is a beautiful pit viper.
Yeah.
But sadly, no, it's not on my list thus far.
Fair enough.
That's my first venomous species.
Was it?
Yeah, inspired by photographs, probably from your book, I would imagine.
Oh dear. Yeah, it is a beautiful species.
And just talking of photographs, I know we've spoken to this before, but I don't think people appreciate enough when you look at older books how good the photographs are, because they're not digital.
Yeah.
And to take film photographs in a humid environment in the dark and not be able to just look at the back of your camera and see if you've got it or not. Yeah. I just think I have such respect for some of the old photographs.
There's a very important word. It's called bracketing. You shot everything on different settings.
Yeah.
I did that all through Big Adventure. All my pictures, I was shooting film. I had 2 identical film outfits, each in a Pelican case. Identical camera bodies, identical Canon macro 100mm macros, identical Metz flash guns, and the one was the red camera, the other was the green camera. They had dots, colored dots on them. I never mixed anything, never swapped anything over. They stayed completely separate. I would go on a shoot with 50 or 60 films of Kodachrome 64 or latterly Velvia 100, which was expensive to process. And I would shoot everything on both cameras. And I would bracket and shoot everything at different settings, because you don't know what you're getting. And if one camera had developed a fault and you got back and you'd got like 200 quid worth of film had gone through that camera, but nothing was any good, you just hoped that the 200 quid that had gone through the other camera was. You couldn't cover all bases. You weren't going to take a third outfit. It wasn't guaranteed. But that's what you had to do. And then I would have to process my films. And then it was always heart-stopping when I went to pick them up, start to go through them. And I have got a whole room of slide cabinets upstairs with all my slides in. And I've still got 200 films that I haven't actually been out from working in Timor, that I haven't actually yet been able to find the time to catalogue, that are processed and waiting to be catalogued. 200 films of 36 exposures each. Yeah, I mean, and it took me a long time to move on to digital, because the first I tried digital, and I had a Canon D30. Now, that's not a 30D, that's a D30. It's a totally different piece of kit. It was shit.
Yeah,
it was shit. I couldn't.
That's our Canon sponsorship blown now.
Yeah, it's all right.
Well, yeah. Well, their cameras are marvelous now. I use them all the time. Oh, I love. In fact, my work. What I say to somebody, are you Nikon or Canon? And if they go, I'm Nikon, I go, Canon MPE 65mm. Look it up. You can shoot 5 times life size. And I said to Canon, if I put a ×2 converter on this, can I go 10 times life size? They said no, because there's an element in the front that'll hit the element. No, you can do it. I do it. I've stood there and photographed in a swamp in Timor ant mimic ants predating green ants. And I've stood there and I've filled the frame with the ant, handheld, illuminated with a twin light, and get great photos. But only because I'm shooting digital now and I can see what I've got. Back then, you didn't know what you got. You didn't even know if you're in focus. Yes, I lived it. I've been doing that sort of photography since the 80s. But when I had that D30 and discovered how rubbish it was, that put me off digitals for a lot longer than it should have. And it was hard to convert me to digital. But when I did convert and stop using, I've still got my Canon cameras, the film camera. I've got rid of the lenses, but I've still got the camera bodies. My Canon F1s, they're bronze, brass, covered in black. I mean, you could fight your way out of a bar with them.
That's good, man.
After that, I've forgotten which cat. Where were we?
We're Western Ghats.
We were Western Ghats.
Right, Western Ghats. Yeah, nothing so dangerous in the Western Ghats. Oh, I'll tell you about Sri Lanka. We're looking for we're looking for Russell's vipers in Sri Lanka, and I've caught Russell's vipers now in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and Indonesia. But in Sri Lanka, you know how you just know when you see something up at night on the road. You just know. We're road cruising, and this little piece of white appeared from the verge way ahead and dropped back. And I said, there's a Russell's viper up there. And the crew don't believe me. I said, there is a Russell's viper up there. And I jumped out of the vehicle and my head torch came loose. So I'm running with that in my hand. I've got a snake hook, and I jumped down into this ditch right where I'd seen the white, pinned down, Russell's viper. I mean, I'd seen it. I'd seen just its supralabials and just knew
just enough
what it was, And I was so chuffed to get that.
What I want to ask about the Russells specifically is that, especially in the Sri Lankans, so we see, especially in American herpetoculture, we see Sri Lankan Russells imported from time to time, and they fetch a pretty penny, but they're very Indian in appearance to me. The ones that you found in Sri Lanka, were they more siamensis looking, or were they?
No, they won't be siamensis looking. No,
that light,
it's about
creamy,
extra marks on the side and so forth. No, nothing like siamensis. There's a degree. I mean, from all the ones I've seen in Sri Lanka, there's a degree of variation in the patterning, but it's not a siamensis patterning.
Right.
There used to be Pulchella, I think, subspecies, but none of those are valid now. There's no same as none of the subspecies that would now fall into siamensis are valid. You know, the two from Indonesia, the one from Taiwan, the one from mainland. I mean, the siamensis population is very fragmented. There's a Myanmar population, there's a Thai population that isn't linked to it. There's a little population up in mainland China near Hong Kong. You've got Taiwanese population. You've got a Javanese population, and then there's a population down in the Lesser Sundas on the inner Banda Arc.
Right.
I've seen them around Komodo, but they're also, I think, on Flores and so forth. And it's where the habitat exists. I mean, a long time in the past, the distribution would have been contiguous, but they're not really tropical, and so where it's wetter or anything like that, they're not found. And so you get these little relictual pockets of them. And the population in South Asia is much more, I would say, contiguous, but for the fact that Sri Lanka is an island.
Right.
But there is considerable variation in the venom. We ascertained that there's potentially 4 ways that a Sri Lankan Russell's viper can kill you that aren't addressed by the Indian antivenom, which is why Sri Lanka needs an antivenom, which is why hats off again to Instituto Clodomiro Picado in San Jose, University of San Jose in Costa Rica, because those guys are producing antivenom for Sri Lanka and Africa, and they did a Taipan antivenom for New Guinea. And they are if you were looking for a hero of in snake bite, look no further than the Institute of Clodomiro Picado, ICP.
Yeah. Were they the first to produce a mainstream lyophilized or no?
I don't know. I don't know that. Okay. I mean, I can't talk about the history, but they produced antivenoms for Costa Rica because Costa Rica began to have a snake bite problem. Dan Jansen sort of stopped a lot of the forest being cut down, but where areas were cleared, you started getting issues with terciopellos, and snake bites started to increase. And then they started producing antivenom for the whole of Latin America, and then they started producing antivenom for the whole of South America as well. And then you see, they're not a biopharma, big biopharma company that looks at the bottom line. There are companies like Pasteur and Beringwerk that used to produce antivenom that have dropped out of doing it because they can make a lot more money from obesity drugs and heart disease drugs and cancer drugs because they'll sell them to the West because we've got the money to pay for them. Snake bite is you've got me on my hobby horse now. Snake bite is a disease of the poor people who don't have a voice in developing countries, and those countries often can't afford to spend much on antivenom. And therefore the big biopharma companies are less interested in it because they're not going to make a lot of money. I personally think they make plenty of money from other drugs, so they could do a little bit for humanity and produce drugs, antivenoms at a price that's affordable for developing countries. It's death through snake bite is horrible, and it very rarely happens to one of us, touch wood, but it does happen on a regular basis in tropical countries to people who were not planning to pick up a snake that day, but accidentally stepped on it. So so I've gone way off kilter. But you get me talking about snake bites, I'll talk. I'm afraid it is a hobby horse of mine, and I think that in the 21st century we should be doing a hell of a lot more about it. Agreed.
100%. So I'm going to take you from India. What about Europe? Anything in Europe?
Yeah, I for a long time I didn't go to Europe except to conferences and things. But I've had some one of the things about being in my situation as sort of well known is that herp societies go, well, let's get Mark O'Shea over to do some talks, again to speak at the conference or whatever. And so I've spoken quite a few. I mean, the Australians have done that. They got me all the way over to Sydney to do an evening with Mark O'Shea, and I spent all evening, told them did about 4 lectures. That went down so well that the guys in Melbourne got me over a couple of years later, and it's just great. So when I've been to Europe, we've managed, like, whether I've been there to open an exhibition or to do some museum work or a conference, it's been a chance to go out with the local herpers. And there's nothing better than going out with local guys who are proud to show you their snakes in their favorite habitats 100%. And then go and have a few beers, sit down and just chew the fat. tell war stories. And so I've had a great time like that in Croatia, and a couple of other countries like that. Whereas when we went to Greece, a group of us arranged a little trip to Greece for 4 days to see what we could find, and we found 29 Ottoman vipers.
Wow.
Yeah. So so that was a photographic trip, and we did that in Spain as well. We got a tusk viper and things like that. So and when we arrived in Spain near Madrid, we said, right, what should we do? Should we go herping or go to the pub? And herping got the vote, so we went herping, and I think we got 14 species of herps, and we got all of the groups. We got snakes, lizards, turtles, amphisbaenians, anurans, and salamanders.
Wow.
Salamanders.
Wow.
So we ticked all 6 boxes, right? No tuataras, no crocodiles, so no Sicilians. So the rest of that stay, we're only there about 3 days. We only notched up another 4 species because we'd done so well on the first night.
It's always the way, though. You have a blinding first day, and then you have a sparse second day, or you're just finding the same over and over.
Yeah,
which is still good. It's great to
it's
be
still
out
good
anyway.
because you're getting diversity,
Yeah.
and you're getting the male, the female, the juvenile, and they're all worth photographing.
Yeah, the Ottoman viper is one of my favourite European snakes. I've seen it again in Greece. I was about to go to Samos in a week's time, but we cancelled it because the weather's just too ridiculous there. But I'll go out in May next.
They'll all be underground.
Yeah, it's way too hot at the minute, unseasonably hot. But I will go back out and try and get some pictures for the Samos ones. I really want to photograph.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the size of that thing, it's like an adder on steroids.
Yeah, I would not want to take a bite off one of those. The size of the heads are huge.
Very impressive. Yeah, they are.
Have you seen blunt-nosed viper?
No, not in the wild so far. No,
Okay.
No, because I've not been to Turkey. Oddly, I've not been to Turkey. Maybe one day, and that's a good place to go for those. And I've not been to Milos either. If we'd carried on and done another season of Big Adventure, I would have liked to have done a European one. And the executives are going, Europe? What's interesting about Europe? I said, well, all the young Americans and Australians come to Europe
100%.
in their teen years because they're attracted to Europe. And we could have done a Big Adventure and it would have had also the cultural side of all of these different countries, a bit of the culture, and it would have been more than just finding the herps. But of course, we didn't get a fifth season. So
what would you have gone for?
Well, I'd have been largely driven by vipers, obviously, because that is the showcase group. But I'd like to have gone for a lot of the island species in the Mediterranean that are endemics and things like that. But vipers would have been the driving force.
Yeah, I recently did a trip to Milos to photograph the vipers there, and just fabulous. They're really, really cool. And I was fortunate enough to find blunt-nosed viper on Cyprus as well.
Were you?
Yeah.
Well, you see, I know that Europe is your. You photograph as soon as we've described Europe, you have to go and find and photograph it, don't you?
I do. I've only got 2 things left now, so.
Yes. So it's. I should be interviewing you about Europe.
Well, you were kind enough to put my photographs in your book. That'll do.
The second edition of Chicago University Press are publishing the second edition of the Book of Snakes.
Oh,
coming out, and which that's taken some work because it was published in 2018. That's surprisingly long time ago. We just don't realize that because with COVID, we didn't have any milestones, so it's all compressed, and it's hard. It's not like you don't remember events. Therefore, it's 5 years ago, and there's been 2 new families described since then: the Cyclocoridae and the Microlapidae. and of course the Milos viper is now in with the blunt-nosed viper. It's been synonymized, so I'd got them as separate spreads, so I've had to change that. So I ended, and of course there's been lots of taxonomic changes, moving species across genera and things like that. So it meant a major reorganization of the 600 species, 600 spreads, 600 species. And I've added, I think we've taken out about 18 and put about 18 in. And I've had to go through and I've updated where I've said there are 5 species in this genus and there are now 7. I've done that, and I've gone through and updated the whole shebang.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
And I believe that may be November-ish.
Okay.
Wow. Now I know we've migrated over to Europe, but speaking of all this taxonomic revision, I wanted to ask you about your revision with Boiga maculata, multimaculata,
and Acrasia.
the tawny cat. I can't remember the species name.
Acrasia.
Yeah.
Well, that came out of work when I was in Myanmar with Gunther Kohler from the Senckenberg at Frankfurt, Germany, and I was there to catch front-fanged snakes for the anti-venom production program in Myanmar. And I was getting Mandalayensis and Cuthia and Alba labris and another Trimosaurus, Erythrosaurus I got as well, and obviously Siamensis, and one Bungarus fasciatus. So I was primarily doing that, but I'm also interested in reptiles and amphibians outside of the medically important ones. So we're working together a lot, and we're catching quite a few interesting species. And we got multimaculata, we got Acrasia, and we got Cyane. And Gunther's obviously preserving specimens for the Senckenberg and taking tissue samples and so forth. And when we were back, because Myanmar then went to hell in a handbasket, didn't it? The generals kicked off again.
Oh yeah.
He got in touch with me. He said, "You're not going to believe it, but we've run the tissue samples, and Acrasia and multimaculata are the same snake. It's polymorphic, and whichever name is the older is the one that then has priority." And
right.
That was multimaculata. And so we started to work on that, and with Frank Tillack from the Berlin Museum and a number of other authors, some Asian authors who were collecting material in I think 4 different Asian countries. And so this it was a long project came together to look at the whole group. And it was determined in actual fact that yes, Acrasia was in multimaculata, but could be a subspecies, and it was multimaculata was could be two polymorphic. Subspecies multimaculata could be polymorphic, and Acrasia, I'm trying to remember if that could be polymorphic or just the one color. But there was a third subspecies which we then described,
right?
Centrionalis, I think we called it. I just remember at the moment, because they were different enough to be subspecies, but not full species. And we revalidated Stolitskaya, which is an interesting species that was named for a Czech herpetologist who died of altitude sickness in the Himalayas many years ago.
And that's the third Boiga.
No, that's a separate species that we validated, which had been in as a subspecies. No, honest to God, the paper, I wrote the history of these species, and if you pick up the paper, you need to be concentrating when you read it, because it is so complex, and how different people had named the same species at slightly different times, or who'd published first. There was so much intrigue in it that it's what Heinrich Kaiser and I call forensic historical herpetology, when you're really looking back at the old historical records and working out where somebody was at a certain time. There was one British colonel, and off the top of my head, I think it might have been Bedomi, but he claimed to have collected these specimens in Myanmar, but there was no record of him ever being in Burma, which it was at the time.
Right.
And people didn't keep good records, and you're trying to. It's like a massive whodunit in 3D.
Yeah.
And just the history section of this paper took me forever. And then Frank, who also Frank Tillak's a huge bibliophile, and he'd got a lot of records and quite a lot's in German. And so we would just put all this together, and I'm very pleased with the paper. But yes, Crasier is synonymized, but it remains as a subspecies. And Multomaculata, we normally talk about Multimaculata, and there's a bunch of species. This is the only Multomaculata, and it should have been Multimaculata, but in the original description, it was misspelled all the way through. Therefore, you can't change it.
Wow.
Because when Dowding described the American alligator, he called it Alligator mississippiensis, but with only one P. And it took 30 years for that to get corrected.
Wow.
So, there's a lot more to the nomenclature of zoology and herpetology than the average person probably realizes. That's why I find it fascinating. Actually.
Absolutely.
I spend a lot of time in old papers working things out.
Yeah. I saw that, you et al. Had put something together this year, I should say, 2023. And I figured I'd bring it up because, Nipper and I are big Boyga fans. And
yeah, I used to keep loads of Boyga.
Those two snakes don't look anything alike. So
no, they don't. But
Yeah.
they are. But yeah. Well, they do look alike if you took the color away and the patterning.
Fair enough.
Okay. All right. Corallus ortulanus. Okay.
Mhm.
When I was working on the project in Brazil for 7 months, there was one area where I could walk down the main trail where Corallus hortulanus was hanging about, catching bats at night. And I collected 5 or 6 different color phases. I collected ones that looked like a Crasier. I collected ones that were bright orange. I collected ones that were very black. And I collected ones that looked like Multomaculata. In fact, you could have put them next to each other and you'd have had a green tree python, emerald tree boa scenario.
Yeah.
So we're used to that species being polymorphic. I should say, actual fact, polychromatic. Polymorphic means different shapes, but also includes dichromatic. It's like sexual dimorphism, sexual dichromatism. Dichromatism is more specific. It's about the color. So polychromatic, if you like. We're used to that. And if you start thinking about it, there are other species that we're used to having different color forms in, and we don't think twice about it. So you shouldn't really find this that strange.
That's a good point. Squamagera, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to make a suggestion if it's okay. I really want to talk to Mark about Papua New Guinea.
Yes.
In detail.
Yes.
And I really want to talk to him about some of the outlying islands, Flores and stuff like that.
Yes.
But we've been going for nearly 2 hours.
We can do part two.
Can we do a part 2?
Of course we can. I love this, man. I love talking herp. Yeah. No, that's no problem at all.
That would be great.
And we've got to talk Atractaspis.
Absolutely.
Oh, do we
Absolutely.
have to?
We have to. This is a monumental occasion for me to have not only you as always, but Mark O'Shea. I got to talk to him about stilettos.
Oh my days.
Yes.
It's one of the
silly bugger that's got bit twice by him.
You've been bitten by them.
Yes.
Oh my days. We have to do a big bit of that as well.
That's all you got to do. If you want Nipper to talk to you about your sand boas, just tell him that one went for your jugular and he's there.
It's true. It is true.
I'll be all over that. That's brilliant. So we're going to come back. I mean, Mark, I could literally listen to him for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think it's just amazing. Totally
I'm on cloud 9 right now.
100%. So we will come back. We're going to talk about dirt snakes if we have to. We're going to talk about
dirt snakes, definitely. I'm looking forward to that T-shirt.
Yeah, she would
hashtag Durst
definitely
Hey,
Comment.
100% get a
if you can
t-shirt.
get that over to me before the conference, I'll wear it at that as well.
Done.
You'll get a t-shirt 100% and a Venom Exchange Radio t-shirt
Absolutely.
as well.
We're on it.
Boxed in, as we say around here.
But we need to talk in depth about Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, we do.
I also want to talk to you about places like Timor and Flores.
Timor, we've done a lot of work there. Yes.
Komodo Island, obviously, that sort of area, because Insularis is one of my favourites.
Yes.
So we'll definitely catch up with you. But thank you so much for tonight. It has been absolutely amazing. It's always a real, genuine pleasure to talk to you.
I do love this. I mean, this is what communication was designed for.
100%. But it spins me out that somebody, not wishing to make you feel old, but somebody that I sat and watched as a youngster, I'm now having conversations with, just spins me out incredibly. But
let me just tell you then, when I was on Karka Island, going out to catch Micropechis ikahika, I had 2 Papuan assistants. One of them was a heavy-set Papuan lad. He was probably as broad as he was tall. He got a big, bushy black beard. We're setting off to go and catch Micropechis. And, of course, all the kids follow me. I'm like the Pied Piper. And I turned to him. I said, Peter, we're going after poison snake. It's not good to have the children. Chase them back to the village. So he chased all the kids back to the village. Whoa, his big beard and everything. And he caught me up about 10 minutes later. And he said, when you first came here, I was one of the you chased back to the village.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, I've been around a while.
He's still looking good for it. He's still looking good for it.
Thank you very much. I plan to keep going as long as it's possible.
Yeah, do that. That'd be very cool. So, Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed.
It wasn't so much of a pleasure to talk to you. I've got to be honest. I talk to you all the time.
I know.
But so, thanks for listening to part 1 of our interview with Mark O'Shea. Mark has got such a phenomenal back catalogue of experiences and stories. We think we will spoon feed you a little bit. Too much of a good thing in one sitting is not good for anybody. So thanks for listening to this. Join us again, where we will hopefully have a part 2 to continue our round the world travels with the legend that is Mark O'Shea.